The federal government announced today it will now call a public inquiry into the April shooting rampage that killed 22 people in Nova Scotia. Last week, Public Safety Minister Bill Blair opted for a review panel to investigate the mass shooting, not the public inquiry victims' families and many others had been calling for. So why the change of heart? Is the federal government bending to public pressure, or is there more at play? Sean Fraser is a Nova Scotia Liberal MP and Parliamentary Secretary to Finance Minister Bill Morneau. He was one of 3 Liberal MPs who spoke out publicly against the government for its initial decision. He joins us from the province now. Hi, Mr. Fraser. Good to see you. Thanks for making time. I know it was a long afternoon for you as well. Saw you in committee all afternoon.
Well, look, it's a pleasure to be with you as always. Thank you for having me.
I appreciate it very much. I do want to start on the issue of the inquiry. I woke up this morning and a few hours after read your statement on Facebook expressing concern about the government's decision to go the route of the review versus the public inquiry. They announced during the testimony today, during the Finance Committee, that they were going to go with a public inquiry. Why do you think there was that change of heart?
Well, look, if I can start as a Nova Scotian, it's hard to put into words the impact that this tragedy has had on my home province. The magnitude of the impact, not just on the victims and their families, but on our communities, simply can't be overstated. I took part in an initiative to play the bagpipes one morning shortly after the tragedy took place. And when I came out, I watched my neighbors one by one come out, and I realized to listen to the music. And it occurred to me through the music that we weren't able to grieve collectively because of this pandemic. I have heard loud and clear over the past few days from not just the general public, but from family members that I know that have been impacted by this, that this process is going to give them confidence that they will get the answers they need. And it's finally going to be able to give us as a province the opportunity to get some closure collectively and feel good about the process, knowing that there will be no question unanswered, no matter how difficult it may be.
Did you convey your concern around the initial pursuit of the government, the review route being taken to Minister Blair, to other members of the government? I know that you went public today, but had you previously conveyed those concerns?
Yes, and in fact, I've spoken first and foremost with a number of my Nova Scotia colleagues who've done the same. And I have to say, I have been so thoroughly impressed, not just with Minister Blair, Minister Lametti, and the Prime Minister himself, who was so gracious with his time with me personally to go over some of my concerns. As a result of my work on the finance portfolio during this emergency response, I've been involved with the development of a lot of these emergency measures. But I can tell you at home, the number one thing that I hear people have been impressed with is not any particular policy. It's been our willingness to listen to people who feel like they haven't been heard and to shift course to accommodate their interests and to protect their needs. That's precisely what happened here. I think there were some positives with the initial announcement in terms of the panel that's been selected, the focus on misogyny and gender-based violence that inspired this crime of hate. But it was very clear that the families and victims needed to trust the process if they were going to trust the outcome. And that meant that they needed access to a more robust public process. As a result of that feedback and the advocacy to ministers who were willing to listen, and I have to give a shout out to our minister from Nova Scotia, Minister Jordan as well, we've been able to come up with a process that I have full confidence will give the families and the communities that have been impacted the answers that they need.
I know that you weren't involved in making the initial decision, but I think I do have to challenge you on the assertion that this is a reflection of the government listening. We also interviewed, family members and neighbors and people who had been involved in that really, and I got the same impression, extremely traumatic event in Nova Scotia. And right from the start, they were loudly and clearly advocating for a public inquiry. And in fact, after the announcement was made, when the announcement was made, yesterday there was another protest, a gathering of people to express that viewpoint. It was loud and clear, but the government didn't listen initially. In fact, it took another week or over a week of people continuing to make those calls before they did reverse course. So I'm wondering, why that was the case. I never got a clear answer. First of all, we asked Minister Blair on the show multiple times and he declined our invitation, but Minister Fury as well in Nova Scotia couldn't really explain to us why they were going the route of a review versus a public inquiry.
Sure, and look, I'll apologize in advance because I can't speculate as to what the answer may be when I don't have access to that information. When I suggested that we had a government that was listening, it's been my experience over the past few days. Quite frankly, I've been engaged with people in my own community who've been impacted by this tragedy. And was aware that they were going to want a very robust process. My experience when I had the opportunity to raise the concerns of the constituents who have been impacted is that it inspired the Prime Minister to call me personally to hear those concerns. It inspired Minister Blair to correct course and offer a decision that's going to inspire confidence amongst not just the victims, but the communities across Nova Scotia. So for the reasons that the initial decision may have been taken, I know Minister Blair has a lifetime of experience dealing with serious incidents, including inquiries. There may be reasons why a certain angle was taken in the first instance. I think it was great that there was an effort to look into it at all. And as I mentioned, the panel's qualifications are beyond reproach and the terms of reference were significant. But even if a review would have generated the identical outcome to a full-blown inquiry, it's still important that the people who are most concerned with the process have confidence that every question is going to be answered. So from my perspective, the feedback that I've heard from my community over the past few days, which really has ramped up only over the past few days, has really sunk home. And the government has, obviously with the announcement today, it has agreed to go forward with as robust a process as the Federal Inquiries Act provides for. And I couldn't be more grateful for frankly the shift in this decision, because I know that friends of mine, community members of mine, are actually going to finally get answers that they so desperately need and quite frankly obviously deserve.
Let me ask you on a different note. Our viewers, I should say, are pretty politically keen. Did you hesitate? It's rare for a member of the government to speak out against a decision that his own government has made. Did you hesitate at all to go public with your comments?
You know what? I think that not really. I think, despite popular belief, I've never found it uncomfortable to share my honest opinion, even if it doesn't accord exactly with the position that the government has taken. The Prime Minister has specifically said to me and others on a number of occasions, privately and in public, that he wants us to be the voices of our community in Ottawa, not the voices of Ottawa in our community. When that message is coming from the Prime Minister, it's pretty hard to be uncomfortable about expressing your opinion. I find most often, rather than taking to the airwaves, I pick up the phone. This one, though, this decision mattered to me. For what it's worth, there are personal friends of mine who have been impacted by this. There are family members who have grown up and lived in my community. There are victims who are no longer with us that went to school at the next town over. Whatever the consequences would be, I'm not going to be afraid to share my opinion on something so important. And I had no hesitation that the government would be disappointed or upset, because from day one in this job, I have been nothing but encouraged by our party's leadership and the leadership of this government to express my opinion, to let them know what the Canadians I represent are thinking in my communities.
I can tell that it personally affected you. I'm sorry for that. Is it very personal to you?
Of course it is. Look, the people I know who've lost loved ones are the kindest, most honest, reasonable people you could ever meet. The fact that they are marching in the streets when they are not the type of people who try to stick it to the government, I don't know them to have one partisan affiliation or another, and frankly, I wouldn't care in this circumstance. There are people who are hurting, and our province collectively has been hurting for months. If this is one small thing that we can do as parliamentarians with our time in office, is to give them closure when they have lost a family member. I'm going to do it. My colleagues are going to do it. Our government's going to do it. This is not complicated. This is simple decency and humanity, and I'm so glad with the shift and the willingness to shift course as a result of the feedback that's come in. Speaks volumes to me about the character of the ministers involved and the MPs who've advocated for this kind of change. And I want to say thank you to everyone who's made that advocacy, and thank you in particular to all the families who've reached out to my office and the offices of my colleagues from Nova Scotia.
Yeah, I want to make sure that I note that we are certainly thinking of them through all of this. I know that there's politics involved, as there always seems to be, but at the end of the day, there are a lot of people who you rightly point out who have been very hurt by all this, and we hear from them as well. And I want to make sure I convey that we are thinking of them as well. Mr. Fraser, if you don't mind, before I let you go, I'll switch to what I think will be a much less emotional topic, because I did watch you sit through the 4 hours of testimony from the Kielburger brothers today. And I sat there wondering, just given your role as parliamentary secretary to Minister Bill Morneau, if you have had conversations with him about his role in all of this.
Yeah, the minister was very quick to call me after his testimony. I wasn't there that day. My family took a couple of days on an annual trip with our daughter to PEI now that we have the Atlantic bubble. The minister explained to me that he was sincerely apologetic for what had taken place. He acknowledged that he'd made a mistake that he wished to take back. I don't believe that there was impropriety on his part. I do believe him, and I take him at his word that it was an honest mistake, but nevertheless a mistake. One of the things that I encouraged him to do is to continue to reach out to caucus members to say that he's interested in their feedback on what's taken place around this. But at the end of the day, one of the things that we both discussed before we part ways on that call was that this program, and more broadly the different emergency programs we rolled forward, were designed to help Canadians. This policy development process, speaking from my firsthand participation in it, has been like nothing I've ever seen. We have been moving at breakneck speed for months, and we've landed some very important and impressive policies that I have been thrilled to be included with. Some of them have been a little smoother than others, and this one ended up being a bit clumsy. But I don't for a second believe that there was dishonesty involved, despite some of the allegations that I'm seeing from other members of the House of Commons. I think it was a mistake. I think the minister has apologized, and I'm looking forward to the remainder of the testimony before the Finance Committee. I do think it's important that if we're going to have the trust of Canadians as we move towards the economic recovery, that we give them the opportunity to seek the answers that they need through this Finance Committee process. And that's why I was actually quite pleased to support the committee study of this. And if there's questions, though they may be uncomfortable by times, they should still be asked, and the government should still be required to answer. So I look forward to continuing to take part in that committee's work to see if we can figure out precisely what's taken place, and then move on towards the important measures that I know Canadians are looking forward to seeing from us as we try to safely reopen the economy and build Canada back on the reverse end of this global pandemic.
Do you think that Canadians, or do you understand how Canadians might see it as a bit more than clumsy, and not just where it pertains to Minister Morneau? Today we heard about, expenses plus speaking fees, $500,000 while the Prime Minister was Prime Minister. I'm not assigning intent to anyone, but it does strike me as, how did it pass through Cabinet? How did it go through a discussion? And those conflicts, or perceived conflicts, I should say, were never raised. Why was it that the Prime Minister never said, oh, wait, we should check into this? Or the Finance Minister said, oh, wait, we could check into this. Like, we had the former Ethics Commissioner on who said that there appears to be an ethical blind spot of sorts. And I'm wondering if you're sympathetic to Canadians who might be feeling that way.
Oh, of course. Look, I understand that this may not this may raise questions for Canadians. It raises questions for me. I'm asking some of the questions about the very things that you just mentioned on the Finance Committee earlier today about speaker fees, how they compare to speakers who are not connected to the government, whether it's ordinary for the We Charity organization and affiliated organizations to submit unsolicited proposals to government, whether they have relationships with other political parties or just those in government. There's all kinds of questions that I have, and I think it's very important that all of those questions are asked from the different parties represented in the House of Commons, and frankly, for the benefit of Canadians. I do think that there are serious questions that should be asked anytime the government rolls a program out, whether the program has been successful or not. Though it may, I hope you'll take me at my word that we do have an interest in transparency to the extent there has been mistakes made. I think we should shine a light on them, admit fault where that's appropriate, and then explain to Canadians how we intend to do better. Both the Finance Minister and the Prime Minister have acknowledged some of the mistakes that you've just referenced, including the fact that they probably should have recused themselves. I'm very much looking forward to the Prime Minister's testimony later this week before the Finance Committee, because these are some of the kinds of questions that I intend to ask.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you, Mr. Fraser. Appreciate your time this evening.
Of course, a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.